Hello and welcome to episode 291 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. What's up?
Hello, Jason. Where are you joining us from today?
I am unexpectedly in Istanbul at the moment.
As one often does,
Yeah.
The unexpected arrival in Istanbul.
Of course, the unexpected trip that I did not know I was taking until about 2 days before I left on business travel. But it was my first time flying Turkish Airlines, first time to Turkey or Istanbul as a whole, actually. So I'm actually happy to be on business travel for a change.
There you go. Well, I know the backstory to all of the shenanigans that went on to get you onto that flight and make everything work. So I'm glad it all worked out and I'm glad you made it. And I hope you're having a nice time. And because of Jason's presence in Istanbul, we're recording before the largest story of the day breaks in a couple hours. So it's Wednesday.
Sorry about that, but
yeah,
you'll hear about it anyway.
So we're going to record and put in the podcast two brief stories, and one of them will be correct. So it's Wednesday, October 23rd at just a little past 8 in the morning here in Chicago, just a little past 4 in the afternoon in Istanbul. And that means that Boeing machinists are currently voting to either accept or reject the latest proposed contract offer from Boeing. Boeing raised the base pay rate for the currently striking machinists to a 35% raise over the 4-year life of the contract. The union leadership felt that this latest offer, which was not the last, best, and final offer issued on the 25th of September, so almost a month ago, but this new last and maybe best and maybe final
true to
offer.
The aviation industry.
Exactly.
It's never the last and final morning.
It's always the 30-minute rolling delay. So they're voting, now. So voting will continue a few hours after we have finished recording. So here's story one. The machinists approved the contract and will return to work shortly, accepting a 35% raise from Boeing, moving the company out of its mire and moving forward. And we wish the machinists and Boeing the best of luck. That was story one. Story two. The Boeing machinists have rejected the contract, the strike will carry on, and things are definitely not looking up for Boeing. That was story two. Pause for transition. Because Boeing reported its third quarter earnings today.
Ooh,
and they lost a ton of money.
If you want to measure a ton of money, a ton would be approximately $6 billion US dollars, which I think qualifies as a ton, like
literal ton.
Hyperbole when you talk
more
about
than
money.
A literal ton.
Yeah.
Depending on what denomination of bill you're using.
Yeah, six billion US. That is a lot of money.
I actually did the math recently on this for purely unrelated having children reasons, and they ask weird questions. But if you wanted $1 million in nickels, it would take 10 standard dump trucks.
Oh, thank you for running that math. So how many dump trucks of nickels did
a lot more. Here? Oh, you would need all of the dump trucks.
Okay.
Boeing lost $6 billion in the third quarter of 2024 on revenue of $17.8 billion. This is also the first time that we have heard from Boeing's CEO in length. He is giving remarks. Really? Well, we're going to hear from him. He's giving remarks at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time, which is about an hour from now. But we have those remarks ahead of time, and we know that he's going to say that Boeing is at a crossroads. He's going to say that trust in the company is eroded. True. They're saddled with too much debt. True. And we've had serious lapses in our performance across the company, which have disappointed many of our customers. True. I would expand that to disappointed everyone.
Everybody from airline customers down to, actual flying public by way of canceled flights and airplanes not existing. But then he goes on to say, by the same token, we have great opportunities ahead. Our company backlog is roughly $500 billion, but you only get to cash in on that $500 billion if you can actually deliver the things that customers have presumably bought. We have a customer base that wants us and needs us to succeed, and that is very much true. And we have employees who are thirsty to get back to work to the iconic company they know, setting the standards for the products that we deliver. And a quote here, it goes on, So my mission here is pretty straightforward. That's a good way to put it, I think.
It's straightforward. It ain't easy, but it's
They
straightforward.
never said it was easy. They never said this was easy. And they break it down to requiring 4 particular changes. In order, they need a fundamental culture change in the company. And it's really great to see that as not a mention, but the number one mention. First and foremost, a culture change at the company, which is something that people have been saying for years, that Boeing has largely given lip service to, saying, yeah, the company culture has changed. Believe us. Take our word for it. We all know to this point that has been a lie. That has not been true. It still needs to be fixed and addressed. Second, we must stabilize the business. Third, we need to improve our execution discipline on new platform commitments across the company. And fourth, while doing the first 3, we must build a new future for Boeing. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a new future for Boeing does and, more importantly, does not mean.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the point 3 and just lay out what he's talking about, which is everything. Because the improve our execution discipline on new platform commitments, nothing Boeing has done recently in the past few years has frankly worked.
No, and that ranges from aviation all the way to military aviation,
The moon.
to space, to literally in space, where just this past week, another Boeing-built satellite kind of exploded, which is not great. You don't want satellites to explode. And that was one that actually provided in-flight connectivity to airlines over Africa and the Asia regions. So you might actually feel a direct impact of that, even if you didn't know that not only did Boeing build satellites, but they have a recent history of going kerpoof in space, which is not good.
Yeah. So that's the straightforward, as Ortberg says, task at hand. So he goes on to say that he's got an outside-in view of Boeing because he's worked with the Boeing supply chain for the last 20 years. So combining that with being at the top of the Boeing organization now, he says the culture change starts at the top. So they're going back to basics. I mean, none of this is groundbreaking. There's no aha, why didn't we think of that? He talks about going back onto the factory floors, into the engineering labs, need to know what's going on, quote, not only with our products, but with our people.
It almost sounds a little like Winston Churchill's speech of "We shall fight them on the beaches," where he's basically saying, we'll fight them on the factory floors and in the back shops and in our engineering labs. And it's a weird way to frame it, but he is kind of, I feel like they're going to war on themselves in every possible way that they can.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not groundbreaking, but it just makes good sense. Point 2, stabilizing the business. And that seems like the strike may end today. Quote, we've been working feverishly to find a solution that works for the company and meets our employees' needs. He talks about resetting the union relationship, which maybe got off to a rocky start with Stephanie Pope's first, best, last, take it or leave it shenanigans. And talks about task of restarting the factories and the supply chain. Much harder to turn it on than it is to turn it off. And so he talks about safety and quality management systems. And he goes on to talk about, understanding that they need to get back to basics in order to get the FAA to sign off on an increase in their production rates if they're going to move forward.
Yeah. Increasing the 737 production rates, which is above and beyond what they already can't achieve. So they can't even achieve, if the strike were to end today, they wouldn't even be able to hit the current production rates, so let alone the future increased 737 production rates up to and possibly including the line up in Everett that we'll see one day maybe.
Yeah. So none of this is earth-shattering. It's not groundbreaking. It's just good sense. And I guess up until now, Boeing leadership has been unable or unwilling to do the work. So it remains to be seen whether or not Boeing will in fact do the work this time around. But I really hope that they're serious this time.
Well, they have to. They do not have a choice at this point because what is going on at Boeing is leading to $6 billion quarterly losses, and that can't be sustained. Forget long-term, short-term, this can't go on. So at this point, it's either you fix it or something so dramatic at Boeing has to come up that the company's either broken up or changes form entirely, that this really does seem like the last opportunity to right the ship. And this statement that's going to be read during the earnings call really does seem to acknowledge that, hey, my predecessor kind of sucked at his job. didn't do any of the things that they said they were going to do to fix the culture, to fix production, to fix management, to fix all of the things that, in their word, were festering. It's now or never, really.
It is, in fact, now or never. So hopefully, when we get to the fourth quarter earnings, we're talking about a much different story. And in Kelly Ortberg's words, a large ship that is slowly turning around. So good luck. And we hope to have a very different conversation in a few months' time.
Yeah, but one thing we know is not now or never. It's either going to be later or never, is the development of a new airplane at Boeing. And I'll quote the statement today. Boeing is an airplane company, and at the right time in the future, we need to develop a new airplane, but we have a lot of work to do before then. So there it is. There's your confirmation that the 797 or whatever comes next for Boeing, it is either so minutely under development right now or not under development at all, and won't be coming in the near future until they do all of the things that we've been talking about here, which we don't know how that long that's going to take. It could be years before Boeing officially launches a new aircraft program, or at this rate, maybe never. I hope that's not the case, but they are definitely putting any rumors or speculation of a new aircraft program at Boeing to bed right now. It's not happening for the time being.
Oof. All right, let's move on. Jason, we're going to head to Austin now, where last week an American Airlines 737 and a Cessna R182 Skylane came dangerously close as the American flight was preparing to land in Austin. The Cessna was traveling westbound at about 2,000 feet, while the American 737 was preparing to land. And as the American 737 was lining up for the runway 36 left, so flying due north, lining up for the runway, the Cessna turned due south directly into the path of the American 737.
Not great.
Not great.
Not great. The shenanigans in Austin usually happen on the ramp and on the ground, not in the air. But this
happened in the air. So the 737 received a TCAS resolution advisory. They climbed, they turned right. The TCAS resolution advisory put them into conflict with a third aircraft that was in the area. The controller asked them to get out of the way, and everything was over in about 30 seconds. Proving once again that TCAS is one of the most incredibly wonderful safety tools in the history of aviation.
Yeah, never really thought about what happens when there's a third aircraft in the mix, as there was here. Kind of seems like TCAS was limited in this instance to avoiding a catastrophe between two aircraft, but maybe not a third. So I guess it's good that air traffic control was on top of their game in this situation, but things seem like they're bad enough that maybe we need to figure out a new version of TCAS that can take account of everything around them.
Yeah, I don't know if... So the TCAS RA induced a loss of separation, but not as yet a risk of collision, if that makes sense. So They got inside the outer bubble, but they didn't get to where they were actually going to hit each other. So thankfully that didn't happen. But just the Cessna was not talking to the approach controller, even though they were not in airspace where they were obligated to be on frequency with the approach controller. However, the wisdom of flying in congested airspace near an airport where you have aircraft that are using the approach where you are flying, it seems to me like it would be a wise decision to check in with the controller anyway, even if you're not obligated to.
Yeah, or maybe the FAA needs to rethink everything about Austin. From the ground management to the airspace around the airport. It seems like things are kind of bursting at the seams there, and not particularly the safest situation. Maybe it's time for the FAA to take a closer look at what's going on there.
Perhaps it is. But I want to get, some kind of informed opinion on this. If you're a pilot, whether or not you would be flying the Cessna or the 737, or if you're a controller and you're listening to the podcast, because I know there are a few, email us at podcast@fr24.com and let us know kind of what you think about this. I understand that the Cessna was not obligated to be talking to the controller, but as someone who sees what's happening, kind of in an aerial view, I just don't see the wisdom of not checking in. So email us at podcast@fr24 if you've got some thoughts on that, if you can offer some wisdom. I always appreciate wisdom anywhere I can get it. Speaking of not a whole lot of wisdom, Indian Airlines have been hit by a spate of hoax bomb threats this month. I think we're nearing 6 flights that have had bomb threats either called in or posted online. There were the initial spate of threats. Then there were some teenagers who were copycatting the initial threats. Those teenagers were found quickly and have been, I don't know if they've been arrested or what happens to juveniles in India when they are caught making hoax bomb threats, but they have continued. Some of the worst ones have been a Air India flight from, I think we talked about this last week, from Delhi to Chicago, where they diverted to Iqaluit, and then they were taken onward by the Canadian military. Another one later in the week happened in London, where the RAF scrambled a Typhoon. They've happened all over India. They've happened in Singapore. Just, it continues. So no real end in sight. Yesterday, Tuesday, October 22nd, there were 6 Squawk 7700s in a span of 30 minutes.
Wow.
So not great. Please, if you happen to be listening to this podcast and you know what's going on, cut it out. Cut it out. Though I really hope that no one who would be doing this is listening to our podcast. Hey, Jason.
Yo.
Remember when we talked about the one merger that made sense a while ago?
You must be talking about the Boeing Airbus merger.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep. The only way that makes sense. No, that's right. I think you're talking about Frontier and Spirit.
I am. And remember what happened after we talked about the merger that made sense?
Yeah, something terrible happened where JetBlue tried to extremely overbid successfully and knocked Frontier out of the running for Spirit, only then to have it turned down by the courts. And now both airlines are in trouble, and Spirit is fending off Chapter 11 with all sorts of extensions. But what's old is new again, and Frontier is apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, looking to re-engage with Spirit.
I mean, we said at the midpoint, I want to say, of all of this, that the real winner in all of this was going to be the lawyers and the investment bankers.
It's always them.
The only airline to come out of this in halfway decent shape is going to be Frontier. And that seems to be the case.
If this goes through, yeah, Frontier would presumably get Spirit for a much lower cost than originally. Spirit's in a much worse position now.
We will give you $1 for all of these A320neos.
I mean, that's a pretty good deal, but also the landscape has changed quite a bit since Frontier originally went after Spirit, where both airlines have kind of gone upmarket a little bit because the majors have kind of not cracked the code against LCC or ULCCs, but they've figured out how to compete better. And now it's a very different landscape with Frontier and Spirit both offering no change fee, no cancel. They both have some sort of premium products that they're differentiating now. So it's a different landscape, but it's very much the same situation. Here we are all over again.
So this is preliminary talks. It could come to nothing. It could come to something. We don't know. We have no idea at this point, but definitely what's old is new again. Jason, it was not a great week to be taxiing an aircraft in Chicago.
I mean, it's never a great time.
It's never.
An aircraft in Chicago.
It was particularly bad this week, or last week, actually.
In like the same spot, twice, I
think.
In
roughly the same spot, yes.
What happened?
So let's go with the first incident. This was a American Airlines 787 taxiing on October 17th behind an Air France A350, which becomes important in a moment because a baggage tug towing ULDs, so the unit load devices that go in the belly of the aircraft, was towing a few of those. They were empty, which means that they're rather light, which means that if you drive behind an aircraft that's applying power to its engines, those are going to come off. And in this case, they were blown directly into the engine of an American 787, or one of them was.
Not great right now. Not a great, particularly that aircraft, not a great time to have to get spares for
no
787s right now.
No. So this is certainly not the first time this has ever happened. There's a great photo that I'll put in the show notes from 2009 in Los Angeles, Japan Airlines 747, not only sucked the ULD into its engine, but it got stuck there. So that's certainly not the first time this has happened. But then a few days later, the exact same thing, well, not the exact same thing, but a very similar situation happened to a JetBlue aircraft. Landed, flight 811 from Boston landed in Chicago on time, and then got struck by a luggage container.
Was it the same situation where Tug was tugging it across the taxiway and it got sucked in, or was it just, something was left where it shouldn't have been?
That is unclear. It sounds like it was just less of a sucking into the engine and more of a hitting of the engine. We'll see kind of how that happened, but not great. Not great at all. So watch out for the, ULD devices if you're taxiing an aircraft around Chicago this week. Where should we go next? Let's stay in Chicago headquarters and talk about the fact that United is gobbling up any A321neo it possibly can.
Which we knew. We knew was coming, but it's nice to see a plan come to fruition, even if it wasn't the plan all along.
Right. So late last week and announced in United's third quarter earnings this week, United signed, quote, definitive agreements with multiple unnamed aircraft lessors to lease 40 A321neo jets that are going to start being delivered in 2026, and those deliveries will run through 2027. So anywhere they can, anybody who has an A321neo slot, they are taking it.
Yeah, I really feel like I should have gone back a few years, scrapped some money together to take up a few 321neo slots just to hold on to them to resell them for twice.
Just to resell, yeah. I mean, I wonder how much that would cost.
Is that a thing? Speculative aircraft manufacturing slots?
Sure. What do you think lessors are?
Yeah, but they intend to, lease them out.
Oh, you mean like entirely like where people buy oil futures and then have absolutely no intention of actually buying the oil?
Exactly. And then one day it comes and oh no, what do I do with all this? I'm losing all my money. But in this case, there's always a customer for this stuff.
There's always a customer.
Right now in this market, I wonder if that's actually a thing.
Call Airbus and say, how much would it take to get a slot and find out?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's new aircraft, and here goes old aircraft. Qantas is ending 717 operations this week. The last flight is going to be the 26th of October. So the list of 717 operators is dwindling mightily.
Yes, but thankfully one of them is Delta, and Delta will probably operate those aircraft forever. I think they're still actually bringing them all online back from being parked during COVID. They're either all back now or almost all back in service. So if you're a 717 fan, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Delta's
You've got time.
Back.
And then Czech Airlines is ending operations entirely, kind of. So the Czech Airlines brand will cease operations this weekend. The last flight is also on the 26th of October. And then they're going to fold everything into the parent company, SmartWings. So Czech Airlines is 100 years old, one of the oldest continuing operating airlines in the world. And sadly, they will end branded operations this weekend. So sad to see, but unfortunately in their case, it was partly external factors, but also partly gross mismanagement on their part.
According to Wikipedia, Czech Airlines was actually the fifth oldest airline in the world behind KLM, Avianca, Qantas, and Aeroflot at the time, or whatever incarnation of Aeroflot there was, and was the first airline in the world to regularly operate jet-only routes between Prague and Moscow. So there's a lot of history to this brand. And another Star Alliance loss here. Not that I think it's a particularly big loss. I'm pretty sure
they were down to one aircraft.
More than make up for that. But yeah, just sad to see any airline brand this storied bite the dust.
Absolutely. Play Airlines, the Icelandic leisure low-cost carrier, is shifting its business model away from the Icelandair model of connecting passengers between North America and Europe through Iceland, and moving to a more point-to-point leisure-based warm destination tourism and people who want to go to Iceland for tourism kind of thing. They're adding a Maltese AOC so that they can operate throughout Europe more easily. And all of that is going to begin about mid-2025. They've seen the landscape shift under their feet and they've said, hey, we're going to change with it. Instead of trying to make this work, we don't want to wow anybody. We just want to continue to play.
I get it. I see what you did there.
There you go.
I see what you did there. So Icelandair, I'm sure, is breathing a heavy sigh of relief. Yet another competitor defeated.
There you go. ITA Airways, which Lufthansa Group is in the process of gobbling up. The Italian government has kind of released what they're going to need to do in order to make all of that work. And our good friend Ned Russell comes to us with some reporting on what the remedies are going to be. And that includes what we pretty much assumed is EasyJet getting a ton of slot pairs in Milan. So 15 slot pairs. And Air France looks like it's going to get a pair of pairs. And then British Airways will get 5 pairs. And this is according to Leonardo Berberi, Italian reporter who does great work there. He's reporting that the British Airways is going to get 5 slot pairs for, quote, long haul concerns, which is interesting to me.
Really know what that means. I can't expect BA to spin up an Italian subsidiary for long haul flights. So not really sure what that means unless you consider, the UK not Schengen, therefore long haul. Cool. that could be something. I don't know.
We'll fly the long way to get there. Maybe that's what they mean.
We'll find out one day.
It'll shake out further. This is a story that I think we all knew was coming because there wasn't really a way around it. But it's still just, if it wasn't so dangerous, it would be laughable. Russia has begun the process of creating a certification system for all of the fake parts that it's making for foreign aircraft. So basically they're saying, we want to certify all of the uncertified parts for the Boeing and Airbus aircraft that we kept, that were on lease, that we now can't get genuine parts for.
Okay. At least they'll be able to track and figure out where these parts are and what exactly they are and how they were made, rather than it just being the wild west of counterfeit gray market parts. So that's maybe that's some good.
The funny thing is that the quote from the Russian government says that considering the shortage of foreign-made spares, it can be concluded that the alternative spares market will actively develop, cautioning that a gray market of unauthentic components could otherwise emerge.
I'm pretty sure we're already there.
What?
Yeah.
You're a few years late to the party, guys.
Hey, at least they're acknowledging it at some point.
Fine. All right. Jason, we don't like to talk about things that aren't quite real yet, but things seem to be getting quite real with the FAA approval of what they're calling the powered lift category. So this is the FAA's new rule for what we've called eVTOLs, what has generally been called air taxis. This final rule is for the qualifications and training that pilots must have to fly these aircraft. So all of these things like operational requirements, minimum safe altitudes, visibility, all of these requirements go towards what standards these aircraft will have to meet in order for operations. And then we get to, actually building and certifying the production aircraft. So it's an interesting thing to be talking about now that the FAA has finally issued their rules. We're still not close to certifying any of these aircraft yet. But the FAA says they put all of these rules into place because, quote, existing regulations did not address this new category of aircraft, which can take off and land vertically like a helicopter and fly like an airplane during cruise flight. The rule provides a comprehensive framework for certifying the initial cadre of powered lift instructors and pilots. So there you go. I'm excited because we're going to get through all this technical stuff. And then people are going to see these things flying around and go, absolutely not, do not want.
Yeah. I mean, the FAA administrator put out, I think it was a post on Medium today.
Ooh.
Talking about, nice to see direct talking to the people through a post like that. But it was interesting to see how they liken this to, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to figure it out. Just like we did for drones and unmanned aerial systems, where this thing came out of nowhere and it needed to be regulated. And then we did it. And now it's mostly fine. So the same thing needs to happen here with air taxis or eVTOLs or whatever. And we want to get out ahead of it. And it seems like they're actually kind of doing that.
Yeah. We'll link to the FAA announcement, the rule, and the Medium blog, as the FAA calls it. Jason, let's end the show with one of the longest running sagas of airlines that a zombie airline? Is that, I think it's safe to call it a zombie airline at this point?
What's the state after being a zombie?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I think it's a zombie in purgatory.
So Jet Airways, which operated up until 2019, then had a group try and resurrect it in 2021, or beginning in 2020. And then by 2021, the court that was in charge of the dissolution plan of the original Jet Airways agreed to a resolution plan. And so that was 3 years ago. They've been limping along since then because no one's gotten paid. No one's done what they said they were going to do. Creditors are angry. Ownership transfer has been stuck in multiple courts. And so the Indian Supreme Court last week said, never mind, we're not going to say anything. And just held over a decision whether or not this airline is ever going to get off the ground. So the lawyers for both the creditors and the consortium trying to get it off the ground say that the resolution plan has failed miserably. So everyone agrees that this is a complete failure. But the consortium that's trying to get the airline off the ground says that the banks just want to liquidate Jet Airways and get any money they can out of it rather than seeing any success here. Which, I mean, if I'm the banks, I don't believe that they're ever going to get the airline off the ground. And I want my money back, at least as much as I can. So it'll be interesting to see how long this drags out, because we could be talking about this 10 years from now where, again, it's the lawyers and the investment bankers that are the real winners here.
Yep. I don't see anyone else potentially winning with this right now. But hey, we love a good story that just, keeps on coming up every 30 episodes or so.
Jet Airways not dead again yet. Jason, I'm going to let you get back to your Istanbul adventures. Safe travels, and we will see you when you're back in the US next week. Next week, we have what I think is going to be an amazing guest. I already think he's amazing, but I think he's also going to be an amazing guest on the podcast. Next week, we are talking with Max of Airplane Facts with Max. I'll put a link down in the show notes to his video content over on Instagram and TikTok, which is just, if you like airplanes, if you like Lord of the Rings, it's just so, so good. So we're going to talk with him about airplanes, a little bit about Lord of the Rings, and just an all-around great time. So tune in next week for that episode. Until then, this has been episode 291 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.